New Year's Eve in Koreatown, Los Angeles. The upscale Korean restaurant called Moonlight Pavilion was closing, its last customers finally gone, leaving behind the ghost of celebration. Amaya Jones was wiping down tables and counting the hours until she could collapse into bed before her morning shift at the coffee shop started at 6. 28 years old and exhausted down to her bones. This was her third job: waitress at Moonlight Pavilion, barista at Sunrise Grounds, weekend receptionist at a law firm that paid just enough to justify the commute. She moved through the elegant space like a shadow, the way she'd learned to move through all spaces of wealth, invisible, overlooked, safe in her insignificance. The shift in air that meant she was no longer alone in the dining room. Amaya had developed instincts working in places like this. She knew when customers were about to complain before they opened their mouths. She knew how to read the room, rid people, stay invisible until invisibility stopped being useful. But she hadn't heard anyone approach, and that sent warning signals down her spine. She turned slowly, a polite service smile already in place, and found herself looking at Jung Tae-hyun. She knew who he was, of course. Everyone who worked at Moonlight Pavilion knew. The owner. The man who appeared occasionally in expensive suits, who had a private office on the third floor that no one entered without explicit permission, who the staff spoke about in whispers that mixed fear and respect. The man rumored to be connected to things no one discussed directly, organizations that existed in the spaces between legal and lethal. He was in his late 30s, though he carried himself with the gravity of someone older. Tonight, he wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Amaya made in 3 months, his dark hair styled with precision, his presence filling the room despite his stillness. Handsome in a way that felt dangerous, sharp cheekbones, intense eyes, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "Miss Jones," he said, his English perfect but accented, "I need your help." Amaya's polite smile faltered. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jung, but I was just finishing my shift." Amaya Jones, 28, working 3 jobs, sending every spare dollar to a legal defense fund. His voice was quiet, matter of fact, delivering information like he was reading from a file, which, Amaya realized with dawning horror, he probably was. "Your brother Marcus, wrongfully accused of armed robbery. His public defender is overwhelmed. The appeal deadline is in 2 weeks. You need approximately $180,000 for a lawyer who might actually save him." The napkin slipped from Amaya's hands. I know everything about people who work for me," Tae-hyun said simply. "It's necessary in my position. Please, sit." It wasn't a request. Amaya sat. Tae-hyun remained standing, his hands in his pockets, studying her with an intensity that made Amaya want to disappear into the chair. But she held his gaze, calling on every ounce of dignity her grandmother had taught her. "Don't let them see you scared, baby girl. Scared is when they win." "I need you to pretend to be my wife," Tae-hyun said, "for 1 week." Of all the things Amaya had expected him to say, that wasn't even on the list. She laughed. Couldn't help it, the sound sharp and disbelieving. "Excuse me?" "My grandmother's arriving from Seoul in 2 days. She's dying. Cancer. She wants to see me married before she passes." He paused, something flickering across his expression too quickly for Amaya to read. "My family is traditional. They expect me to marry within our community, someone Korean, someone who understands our world. I'm bringing you instead." "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. "Because you're strong. Because you've survived in spaces that tried to make you invisible, and you're still standing. Because my grandmother will see that strength." He pulled out a chair, finally sitting, bringing them to eye level. "And because you need money. I need a wife for 1 week. It's a business arrangement, nothing more." $180,000, Tae-hyun continued, pulling out his phone and showing her a screen. "Wired to your account immediately upon agreement. Your brother gets his lawyer. His appeal gets filed. You get to save him." Amaya stared at the number on the screen. 6 figures. Freedom. Marcus walking out of that prison, the charges dropped, his life given back to him. Everything she'd been working toward, handed to her by a man who terrified her on an instinctual level. Why me? She asked again, because it didn't make sense. There have to be hundreds of women who would, not hundreds who can do what I need. Taehyun's gaze was steady. I need someone who can hold their own against my family, someone who won't break under pressure or scrutiny, someone who has nothing to lose and everything to gain, someone invisible enough that my enemies won't have existing files on her. He leaned forward slightly. Someone desperate enough to say yes despite every instinct screaming to run. He wasn't wrong. Amaya's instincts were screaming. But so was the memory of Marcus's face during her last prison visit, the way he'd aged 5 years and 6 months, the hopelessness creeping into his eyes. There's a rule, Taehyun said, his voice dropping into something that raised the hair on Amaya's arms. One condition you cannot break. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a red envelope, the traditional Korean kind used for money and important documents. Inside was a contract, text in both Korean and English, dense with legalese that Amaya's tired brain struggled to parse. But one section was highlighted, impossible to miss. The rule. You must never speak of your feelings. In my world, emotional attachment is weakness. Weakness is death. You will act as my wife, but you will never confess any real feelings that develop. If you do, the contract ends, and you will be removed from my life permanently, for your own protection. Below it, an additional clause. Upon completion of 1 week, Amaya Jones will receive new identity documentation and relocation assistance to Atlanta, Georgia, or city of her choosing. All ties to Jung Tae-hyun will be severed. I don't understand, Amaya said, though she was starting to. My enemies target anyone I care about, Taehyun said simply. Anyone who becomes real to me becomes a liability, a target. So you will pretend to be my wife, and when it's over, you will disappear. The money will be yours. Your brother will be free. But you can never come back into my world, for your own survival. He stood, buttoning his jacket with precise movements. 24 hours to decide. But your brother's appeal deadline is in 2 weeks. Time is not your friend, Miss Jones. Amaya looked at the contract, at the number on the phone screen, at this dangerous man offering salvation wrapped in red silk and impossible rules. She thought of Marcus. She thought of her grandmother's voice. Sometimes survival means making hard choices, baby. I accept, she said. The relief on Taehyun's face was microscopic, barely there, but Amaya saw it. This man needed her as much as she needed his money, though she couldn't yet understand why. Pack for a week, he said. Driver arrives at 6 a.m. Bring nothing that identifies your past. Amaya Jones will cease to exist. Only Mrs. Jung remains. Then he was gone, leaving Amaya alone in the empty restaurant with a contract that felt like both salvation and damnation, and the distant sound of the city beginning to count down to midnight. A new year. A new identity, a new life built on pretense and rules that promised to break her if she wasn't careful. She touched the contract, traced the highlighted words, and wondered what she'd just agreed to. The next morning arrived too quickly. Amaya had barely slept, her mind spinning through scenarios and second guesses until her alarm pierced the darkness at 5 a.m. She'd packed light, a single suitcase with basics, nothing sentimental, nothing that screamed Amaya Jones from South L.A. When the black Mercedes pulled up at exactly 6 a.m., she was ready, or as ready as someone could be for voluntary disappearance. Mr. Kim, the driver, was older than she expected, maybe 60, with silver threading through his hair and eyes that assessed her with professional thoroughness. He took her suitcase without a word, held the door, and drove them not to the restaurant but to a high-rise in downtown Los Angeles that Amaya had passed 100 times without ever imagining she'd enter. Taehyun's office was on the 30th floor, all glass and steel and minimalist elegance. He was already there, seated behind a desk that looked carved from a single piece of dark wood, reviewing documents with the same intensity he'd brought to their midnight conversation. "Miss Jones," he said, standing, "before we proceed, there's something you must wear." From his desk drawer, he produced a small lacquered box. Inside, nestled in silk, was a jade bangle. The stone a deep green that seemed to hold light within its depths, carved with intricate patterns that spoke of age and significance. "Not a ring," Taehyun explained, moving around the desk toward her. "In my family, we give jade. This belonged to my mother. My grandmother gave it to her when she married into our family. It's a symbol of acceptance, of belonging." He held out his hand, and Amaya extended her wrist, feeling the weight of the moment. The jade was cool when he slid it on, heavier than she expected, fitting snugly enough that it wouldn't slip off but loose enough to turn. It felt like both shackle and treasure, binding her to this arrangement, marking her as his, beautiful and inescapable. "You are now Mrs. Jung," Taehyun said, his fingers lingering briefly on her wrist before he stepped back. "My grandmother must believe this completely. No hesitation, no uncertainty. From this moment forward, you are my wife." The jade caught the morning light, and Amaya couldn't look away from it. She was wearing a dead woman's bracelet, stepping into a dead woman's role, and somehow that felt prophetic in ways she didn't want to examine. The luxury apartment was in the same building, 15 floors up. Taehyun's second property, he explained, kept for exactly these purposes: privacy, preparation, transformation. The designer arrived within the hour, a tiny Korean woman named Mrs. Park who spoke minimal English, but had an eye for bodies and fabric that transcended language. She brought racks of clothing, elegant hanbok in modern cuts, Western designer pieces that balanced sophistication with cultural respect, shoes that were both beautiful and practical. Nothing too revealing, nothing that would seem like Amaya was trying too hard. Everything whispered wealth and confidence and belonging. "You need to understand the family structure," Taehyun said while Mrs. Park worked, his voice taking on the tone of a professor delivering critical information. "My grandmother is the matriarch. Her word is law. My father is technically head of the family business, but he defers to her in all personal matters. I have 2 uncles, one who supports me, one who wants my position, various cousins, aunts, relatives who will be watching everything you do." He taught her Korean phrases. "Annyeonghaseyo" for hello, "Gamsahamnida" for thank you, "Josonghamnida" for apology. How to bow properly, the angle depending on the person's status. How to hold chopsticks in the formal style, not the casual way she'd learned at various Asian restaurants over the years. The basics of tea ceremony, though he assured her grandmother wouldn't expect perfection. The hair and makeup team arrived in the afternoon. 2 women, who treated Amaya's natural texture with reverence rather than seeing it as something to be fixed. They styled her hair in elegant twists that honored her curls while fitting the formal aesthetic of the family she was joining. Makeup that enhanced rather than masked, sophisticated without being severe. By evening, when Amaya looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like someone who belonged in Taehyun's world, someone who could stand beside him and make the lie believable. "Our story," Taehyun said over dinner that he'd had delivered. "Korean food," testing her chopstick skills, she realized. "We met at a charity gala 6 months ago. You were the event coordinator. I was there representing family business interests. You impressed me with your directness, your refusal to be intimidated by wealth or status." "Was I coordinating a real event?" Amaya asked, managing the banchan side dishes with reasonable competence. "Yes, the Korean Cultural Center fundraiser last spring. You could have been there in that capacity. The coordinator they actually hired was a woman named Jennifer Kim. Blonde, generic, forgettable. You're much more memorable." "So we had a whirlwind romance." "Precisely. I pursued you. You were resistant at first, smart woman, strange man with unclear business interests. But I was persistent. We kept our relationship private because of my family's expectations. The wedding was small, just us and 2 witnesses, because you didn't want the spectacle, and I respected that." "Why will your grandmother believe this?" Amaya set down her chopsticks, meeting his eyes. "It's so far from what she wanted for you. Because she knows I'm stubborn, because she'll see that you're strong, and she values strength above tradition." He paused. And because she's dying. She wants to believe I've found someone before she goes. Hope makes people accept what they might otherwise question. The flight to Seoul left from a private terminal at LAX, a world Amaya had never known existed. No TSA lines, no crowds, just a sleek lounge in a plane that felt more like a luxury apartment than transportation. Mr. Kim had driven them, and as he loaded luggage, Tae-hyun pulled Amaya aside. Mr. Kim has been with my family since I was a child. He drove my mother. He's absolutely loyal, but he's also observant. He'll be watching to see if we're convincing. On the plane, Tae-hyun was distant, working on his laptop, reviewing documents, his body language closed off. They could have been strangers sharing space rather than newlyweds on their way to meet family. But when the flight attendant came through for meal service, Tae-hyun ordered for both of them without asking Amaya's preference. When the food arrived, Amaya stared at her plate in surprise. Grilled salmon, her favorite, prepared exactly how she preferred it, not Korean food, not what she'd expected. "You researched," she said quietly. "I told you, I know everything about people who work for me." But there was something almost defensive in his tone, as if he didn't want her reading too much into small considerations. Amaya ate her salmon and watched this complicated man try to maintain distance while simultaneously taking care of her in ways he probably didn't even recognize. The jade bracelet was warm now against her skin, no longer feeling quite so foreign. They landed in winter. Snow was falling as the car, another Mercedes, this one driven by a younger man who bowed deeply to Tae-hyun, navigated through Seoul's streets. The city was a study in contrasts, ancient temples beside glass skyscrapers, traditional markets next to luxury shopping districts, history and modernity existing in constant negotiation. The family compound was in an older, wealthy neighborhood, hidden behind high walls that spoke of privacy and security in equal measure. Traditional Hanok architecture, all curved rooflines and wooden beams arranged around courtyards that would be beautiful in spring. Now, covered in snow, they looked like something from a fairy tale, the dangerous kind, where people got lost in forests and made deals with wolves. Grandmother was waiting in the main receiving room, tiny and ancient and absolutely formidable. She wore a deep purple hanbok, her white hair pulled back in a perfect bun, her face a map of years that had been survived rather than simply lived. When her eyes landed on Amaya, they were steel, sharp, assessing, missing nothing. Tae-hyun spoke in Korean, introducing them. Amaya bowed, the angle precise as she'd been taught, and waited. The silence stretched. Grandmother circled Amaya slowly, studying her from every angle, her hair, her clothes, the jade bracelet on her wrist. She said something in Korean that sounded like a question. "She's asking if you're afraid," Tae-hyun translated. Amaya met the old woman's eyes. "Tell her I'm terrified, but I'm here anyway," Tae-hyun translated. Grandmother's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those steel eyes. Recognition, maybe. Respect. Finally, she spoke again, longer this time. Tae-hyun's posture relaxed microscopically. "She says you have survived storms. She can see it in your spine." He paused. "She says you might be strong enough for this family after all." It wasn't acceptance, but it was a beginning. And as grandmother turned away, dismissing them with a gesture, Amaya felt the jade bracelet against her wrist like a promise and a warning. "You're in this now. There's no going back." The room wasn't meant to be a punishment, though it felt like one. Grandmother had arranged it deliberately. A test, Tae-hyun explained tersely as they stood in the doorway of what would be their shared quarters for the next month. One room in the sprawling family compound, traditional in every sense that mattered. Amaya's eyes swept across the space. No bed, no couch, no furniture to create natural boundaries between two people who were supposed to be married but remained strangers bound by necessity. Just Korean sleeping mats, Tae-hyun called them, rolled and stacked against the wall, waiting to be spread across the floor each night. The Ondal heating system radiated warmth from beneath the polished wood, a comfort that felt almost mocking given the discomfort of everything else. "We'll need a dividing screen," Taehyun said, his voice clinical, already problem-solving. "I'll have one brought up. You take the eastern side, near the window. I'll take the west." Amaya nodded, grateful for his pragmatism even as embarrassment heated her cheeks. They negotiated the space like diplomats carving up territory. His side, her side, a demilitarized zone between them. But that first night, changing into sleep clothes with only a hastily erected silk screen between them, every rustle of fabric felt thunderous. She was hyper-aware of his presence just meters away, of the shadows his movements cast against the screen's delicate surface, of the way he cleared his throat softly before asking if she needed anything. She didn't. Except perhaps a manual for how to share intimate space with a beautiful stranger whose last name she now carried. The formal dining room was a battlefield disguised as hospitality. Low tables arranged in a square, cushions for seating, and more relatives than Amaya had prepared herself to face. She recognized Taehyun's father immediately, the same severe bone structure, the same economy of expression, though where Taehyun carried intensity, his father projected cold disappointment. Uncle Jung Min-ho sat to the father's right, watching Taehyun with naked ambition barely concealed behind polite smiles. Amaya had been briefed. Min-ho wanted Taehyun's position, had always believed himself the rightful heir to lead their faction of the organization. Her presence, this marriage, had complicated his ascension. Then there was Haiwan, cousin. Stunning in the way that required effortless genetics and expensive maintenance. She positioned herself directly across from Taehyun, her gaze sliding over Amaya with the kind of assessment women give to intruders in spaces they've marked as their own. Everyone in the room seemed to know what Amaya was just learning. Haiwan had expected to marry Taehyun, had been groomed for the role of wife to the heir. The microaggression started before the first course arrived. "Can she use chopsticks properly?" An aunt's voice syrupy with false concern. "Should we request a fork?" Amaya picked up the metal chopsticks, heavier than the wooden ones she'd practiced with, and continued eating, saying nothing. "Such exotic beauty," Minho observed, his smile sharp, "like a jungle flower. So, different from what we're accustomed to." Taehyun's jaw tightened, but he remained silent until the questions turned to Amaya's people's culture, as if an entire continent could be summarized in table conversation, as if her blackness was a curiosity to be examined, rather than simply one part of who she was. Then Taehyun spoke in rapid Korean, his voice cutting across the table with an intensity that silenced everyone. Amaya couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone, sharp, protective, uncompromising. She watched the family's reactions, Minho's smirk fading, Haiwan's delicate features hardening, the ants suddenly focused on their food. Under the table, Taehyun's hand found hers, warm, steady, a silent alliance formed in that touch, his thumb brushing once across her knuckles before his hand withdrew. But the message had been sent both to her and to everyone watching. She was not alone in this room full of beautiful hostility. The sound woke her just past 3 in the morning. At first, Amaya thought she'd imagined it, a low, wounded noise from the other side of the screen. Then it came again, and she recognized it as the sound of someone trapped in nightmare's grip. "Yama, Jabal," Taehyun's voice, raw with a pain that made Amaya's chest constrict. "Mother, please." She lay frozen on her mat, aware she was hearing something she wasn't meant to hear, witnessing vulnerability from a man who showed the world nothing but controlled strength. The sound of his crying cut through the darkness, not loud, but devastating in its brokenness. Instinct overrode the rules they'd established. Amaya rose, crossed to his side of the screen, and knelt beside his mat. In sleep, his face was younger. The harsh lines softened, his expression twisted with grief. She touched his shoulder gently, whispered his name until his eyes opened, disoriented, haunted, then focusing on her with something like mortification. "You were dreaming," she said softly. He said nothing, but didn't pull away when she took his hand. She stayed there, kneeling beside him in the darkness, until his breathing steadied and his eyes drifted closed again. Only then did she return to her side of the room. In the morning, he didn't acknowledge what had happened, but when she emerged from changing, there was a cup of tea waiting, the jasmine blend she preferred, prepared exactly as she liked it. Grandmother's invitation to help with kimjang, the traditional kimchi making, was not optional. Amaya found herself in the large kitchen alongside Haiwan, two aunts, and several other women whose names she was still learning, all gathered around mountains of napa cabbage and containers of vivid red pepper paste. Her hands began to burn within minutes, the pepper's heat seeping into small cuts she hadn't noticed getting. But the other women worked without complaint, and Amaya refused to be the first to falter. She kept working, mixing and packing, even as her palms felt like they were on fire. American softness? Grandmother observed, watching Amaya's reddened hands. Amaya met her eyes. No, ma'am. I know about preserving things for survival. My grandmother canned everything. During lean times, tomatoes, beans, okra, whatever we could grow. Different continent, same wisdom. For the first time since Amaya had arrived, grandmother smiled. Not broadly, but genuinely. Survival women recognize each other, she said, and handed Amaya a pair of gloves she'd been withholding. Amaya hadn't expected gifts. Their arrangement was business, a transaction for mutual survival. But when Tai-hyun handed her the wrapped package, his expression carefully neutral, she felt something shift between them. Inside was a first edition of Langston Hughes's poetry, her favorite, though she'd never told him that. He must have researched, must have paid attention to the book she'd mentioned in their brief conversations before the wedding. More stunning still was the Korean translation bound alongside the English text and the inscription in his precise handwriting. Your words matter. Written in Korean, but he'd translated it for her below. I noticed you write, he said simply. Poetry. You should have good poetry to read. Her throat tightened. She handed him her own offering, suddenly uncertain. The hand-bound notebook felt inadequate compared to his thoughtful gift, but she'd spent hours on it. Each page bordered with small watercolor paintings, fusion designs that merged Korean geometric patterns with the vibrant textile designs she'd grown up seeing in her grandmother's African fabrics. Tai-hyun opened it slowly, studying each page with an attention that made Amaya's pulse quicken. When he looked up, something in his carefully maintained mask had cracked. No one has given me art before, he said quietly. Only weapons. Seolal, the New Year ceremony, required them to perform as a legitimate married couple before the entire assembled family. Amaya had practiced the bows, the proper way to serve tea to elders, but practice felt different than execution under grandmother's watchful gaze. Tai-hyun knelt beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell the clean scent of his cologne. As each elder approached, he whispered translations in her ear, their names, their relation, what blessing they were offering. His breath against her ear sent involuntary shivers down her spine. When they bowed together, their movements synchronized perfectly, a unity even the hostile family members noticed. His hand steadied her elbow when she rose. Her hand brushed his shoulder in a gesture that looked affectionate, but was pure nervous accident. Yet somehow, together, they looked like what they were supposed to be. The proximity was intoxicating in ways Amaya hadn't anticipated. Every whisper, every steadying touch, every moment of their bodies moving in unison felt like a conversation in a language she was just beginning to understand. Uncle Minho found her alone in the garden, seemingly by chance, though Amaya suspected otherwise. His English was excellent, his smile pleasant as he approached. But his words carried. Threats wrapped in silk. You're temporary, a means to an end. I hope you understand your place in all of this. Before Amaya could respond, Tai-hyun appeared from the covered walkway. He switched to English, deliberately, Amaya realized, so she would understand everything he said. She is my place, Tai-hyun said, his voice quiet but lethal. Touch her, speak to her again like that. You'll remember exactly why I lead and you follow. His physical stance shifted as he moved between Amaya and his uncle, protective, possessive, radiating a danger that made even Minho step back. This was the man people feared, the heir to an organization built on power and violence, and he was using that power to shield her. Amaya's reaction confused her. Fear, yes, but also a forbidden heat, an arousal that felt wrong given the circumstances, but undeniable given the intensity of his protection. She watched Tai-hyun until Minho retreated, then met his eyes when he turned to her. "You didn't have to," she started. "Yes," he interrupted. "I did." And somehow, in that garden with winter light filtering through bare branches, their arrangement stopped feeling quite so temporary. Tai-hyun appeared in their shared room early on a Saturday morning, dressed in clothes Amaya had never seen him wear. Faded jeans, a simple black sweater, a wool coat that looked lived in rather than expensive. His hair wasn't styled with its usual precision, falling slightly across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, almost approachable. "Get dressed," he said. "Something warm. We're leaving." "Leaving?" Amaya sat up on her mat, confused. "Where? No guards, no family, just us." Something flickered in his expression that might have been anticipation. "Trust me." 20 minutes later, they slipped out a side entrance of the compound, no security detail trailing behind them. The traditional market was a 15-minute walk through winding streets, and with each step away from the compound, Amaya watched Tai-hyun transform. His shoulders relaxed, the severe line of his jaw softened. When a vendor called out a greeting, he responded with easy familiarity, almost playful in his banter. This was a different man than the one who sat rigid through family dinners or conducted business with cold precision. This was who he might have been in another life, one not built on violence and obligation. "You come here often?" Amaya asked as they wove between stalls selling everything from dried fish to handmade pottery. "When I can escape." He guided her toward a vendor selling hatiak, the sweet pancakes already filling the air with the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar. "My mother used to bring me here as a child. Before everything changed." He ordered two, handed one to Amaya still steaming hot. She bit into it eagerly, then yelped as the molten filling burned her tongue. Tae-hyun laughed, the sound so unexpected and genuine that Amaya found herself staring at him even as her mouth throbbed. "You have to wait," he said, still grinning. "Impatient? You could have warned me. More fun this way." They continued through the market, Tai-hyun pointing out vendors he'd known since childhood, sharing stories Amaya suspected he rarely told anyone. She bought a scarf from an elderly woman who complimented them as a handsome couple, and neither of them corrected her. It felt too good to pretend, just for a morning, that they were exactly what they appeared to be. Two people falling in love, uncomplicated by contracts and danger. The snow started as they reached the market's edge. Small flakes at first, then heavier, coating the world in white silence. Amaya tilted her face up, laughing at the cold kiss of it on her skin, and when she looked back at Tai-hyun, he was watching her with an expression that stole her breath. He reached out, brushed snowflakes from her hair with careful fingers. His hand lingered against her cheek, thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. They stood like that, suspended in a moment that felt stolen from time itself, the market sounds fading to background noise. Tai-hyun leaned closer. Amaya's eyes drifted closed. She could feel his breath against her lips, warm in the cold air, could sense him closing the final distance between them. He jerked back suddenly, stepping away as if she'd burned him worse than the hatiuk filling. "We should return," he said, his voice flat again. The walls rebuilt in an instant. The walk back to the compound was silent, the magic of the morning shattered like the ice forming in puddles beneath their feet. The tension in their shared room was unbearable. Amaya changed behind the screen with shaking hands, anger and confusion, and something deeper churning in her chest. When she emerged, Tai-hyun was sitting on his mat, head in his hands, the picture of a man at war with himself. "Tai-hyun," she started, her voice stronger than she felt. "I need to tell you. Don't." He looked up, and the anguish in his eyes stopped her mid-sentence. "Please, don't say whatever you're about to say." Why? Because of your rule? Because we're supposed to keep this business? The words tumbled out, weeks of proximity and forced intimacy and genuine connection demanding acknowledgement. That market wasn't business. That moment wasn't, the rule exists because everyone I've loved has died. The confession exploded from him, raw and devastating. He stood abruptly, pacing like a caged animal. Do you understand? Everyone. Amaya waited, her heart hammering. There was someone, Taehyun continued, his voice dropping to something hollow. Before you, Minji. We were together for 2 years. I was careful, so careful, never took her to family events, kept her separate from this world. I thought I could protect her. He laughed bitterly. They found her anyway, the Huang faction. They sent me her finger with a note. Love makes you weak. Amaya's hand flew to her mouth, horror and heartbreak colliding. I brought you into this as business, Taehyun said, finally meeting her eyes. A transaction, a shield against grandmother's pressure, and a way to secure your brother's safety. But if it becomes real, if you become someone I actually care about, you become a target. Don't you see? The rule isn't cruelty. It's the only way I can keep you alive. He crossed to his side of the screen, effectively ending the conversation, leaving Amaya standing in the lamplight with tears streaming down her face. Because she understood now, his coldness was love in its most twisted form. Distance was the only protection he knew how to offer. The summons came the next morning. Grandmother wanted tea, and she wanted it with Amaya alone. The old woman's private sitting room was smaller than Amaya expected, filled with photographs and objects that suggested a life more complex than the stern matriarch she presented to the family. Grandmother poured the tea herself, her movements slow but steady, then fixed Amaya with those sharp, knowing eyes. You love him, she said in broken English, the words clearly practiced but sincere. Amaya's denial died on her lips. What was the point? I didn't mean to. Love does not ask permission. Grandmother sipped her tea. He loves you also. First time he looks alive since his mother died. You know the story? His mother? He mentioned she was killed when he was 12. Grandmother nodded slowly. Rival gang. They shot her in street in front of him. He held her while she bled. He's not been child since that day, until you. I see him smile at market. Yes, I know where you went. I see him laugh. I see him alive. He won't let himself feel it, Amaya whispered. He thinks love makes us targets. Of course it does. Love in our world is curse and salvation both. Grandmother reached across the table, took Amaya's hand with surprising strength. I was outsider too, very poor from country village. Everyone said I would destroy this family with my low blood. Instead, I made it stronger. You are strong like this. She released Amaya's hand and retrieved something from the silk pouch at her side, a photograph, old and carefully preserved. In it, a young boy with Taehyun's features smiled brilliantly at the camera, held in the arms of a beautiful woman whose eyes crinkled with joy. His mother, week before she died. He was happy child once. Grandmother pressed the photo into Amaya's hands. Show him he can be this again. Show him love is not only death, is also life. I don't know if I'm strong enough, Amaya admitted. I am dying, Grandmother said bluntly. Cancer, maybe 3 months, maybe 6. I see truth clearly now. No time for pretending. You must be stronger than death, stronger than fear, or he will be alone forever. The emergency came 2 days later. Amaya was helping prepare dinner when the compound erupted in controlled chaos. Men, gathering weapons, urgent conversations in rapid Korean, the atmosphere shifting from domestic to military in minutes. Taehyun appeared in their room while she was changing, his face set in the cold mask she'd learned to read as extreme danger. I have to leave. Huang faction is threatening our territory on the east side. If we don't respond immediately, he stopped, ran a hand through his hair in rare agitation. I'll have extra security here. Don't leave the compound. How long will you be gone? I don't know. He moved to his cabinet, checking the gun he kept there, and Amaya's stomach clenched with sudden terror. This wasn't business meetings or family politics. This was the violence that always lurked beneath the surface, now rising to claim him. He turned to leave, and Amaya caught his arm without thinking. Tae-hyun! He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then up at her face, and something in him cracked. He cupped her face in both hands, his touch gentle despite the tension radiating through him. Gidario, he whispered in Korean, his forehead briefly touching hers. Then he was gone, leaving Amaya standing alone, her face still warm from his touch. She didn't know the word, but she felt its meaning in her bones. Wait for me. The attack came at midnight. Amaya woke to gunfire and screaming, the compound's peace shattered by violence that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Tae-hyun gone, security divided, the family vulnerable. She rolled from her mat instinctively, her brother's training kicking in before conscious thought. When things go bad, move low, move fast, find cover. She grabbed the photograph grandmother had given her, shoving it in her pocket as boots thundered down the hallway outside their room. The door burst open, 3 men, faces covered, guns drawn. There, the black whore. Kill her, send the message. The first one came at her confidently, expecting easy prey. Amaya waited until he was close, then struck. Palm strike to the nose, knee to the groin, movements her brother had drilled into her for hours in their garage back home. The man went down hard. The second one was smarter, keeping his distance, raising his gun. Before he could fire, Mr. Kim crashed through the doorway, tackling him. The older driver fought with desperate strength, but he was outnumbered. Amaya saw the blade flash, saw blood bloom across Mr. Kim's shoulder. Run! He shouted at her in English. Hiding place, go! Amaya ran, through corridors she'd memorized during sleepless nights, down the stairs grandmother had shown her just days ago, to the old smuggling room built during occupation times. She squeezed through the narrow entrance, pulled the concealed panel shut, and huddled in the darkness with her heart trying to beat out of her chest. She pulled out the photograph, this image of a smiling boy and his mother, and prayed to any god listening. Let him come home. Let him be alive. Let me tell him I love him. The sound of her name tore through the compound like anguish made audible. Amaya! Tae-hyun's voice, raw with terror, calling for her through the chaos. She heard crashes, shouts, the sounds of a man tearing apart a building to find what he'd lost. I'm here, she called out, pushing against the panel. I'm here! The panel ripped open with such force it nearly came off its hinges. Tae-hyun stood there, blood on his clothes. Not his, she'd learn later, his face a mask of devastation and relief. He pulled her out of the hiding place and into a crushing embrace, his whole body shaking. I thought I lost you, he said into her hair, switching between Korean and English. I thought, they told me the compound was attacked. You were the target, I thought. I'm alive, Amaya said, holding him just as tightly. I'm here. I'm alive. He pulled back just enough to scan her frantically, checking for injuries, his hands running over her arms, her face, as if he couldn't quite believe she was whole. And in that moment, with adrenaline and terror and relief stripping away every defense, Amaya broke the rule. I love you, she said clearly. I don't care about the contract. I don't care about the danger. I love you, Tae-hyun. His face contorted with anguish. You can't. Don't you understand? You've killed yourself. By loving me, you've put a target on your back that will never go away. They'll always come for you now. Always. Then we die together. Amaya gripped his jacket, refusing to let him retreat behind his walls. I'm not leaving. I'm not pretending anymore. I'm not living by your rule when I've already broken it. I love you, and you love me, and we're going to survive this together or not at all. Amaya. Say it, she demanded. Say what you feel. For once, just say it. Tae-hyun looked at her, this fierce American woman who'd fought off attackers and hidden in walls and emerged demanding honesty, and something in him finally surrendered. I love you, he said, the words breaking free like a confession and a curse and a prayer all at once. God help us both. But I love you. Then he kissed her, and the world fell away. The danger, the blood, the fear, leaving only this. Two people choosing love in a world built on violence, knowing it might destroy them, choosing it anyway. The week ended on a Wednesday morning. Amaya woke to find Tae-hyun already dressed in a formal suit, sitting at the low table in their room with documents spread before him. His face was the mask she'd seen that first day at the airport, cold, impenetrable, the man who loved her completely erased. "It's done," he said without preamble. "You're going to Atlanta." Amaya sat up slowly, her heart plummeting. "Tae-hyun, the contract is terminated. You confessed love, which violates the terms we agreed upon." His voice was clinical, reading from some invisible script. "Your brother's legal fees have been paid in full. The lawyer I hired is excellent. Marcus will be released within the month. Your payment has been transferred to the account you provided, plus a substantial bonus for complications during your stay." Complications. The word tasted like ash. "Is that what we're calling it?" He didn't flinch. "A new identity has been prepared if you want it, though it's not necessary. The Huang faction has been dealt with. You're no longer a strategic target. But I'm still a liability." Amaya stood, anger rising to combat the devastation threatening to swallow her. "That's what you mean, isn't it? I'm the weakness you can't afford." For just a moment, something cracked in his expression, raw pain breaking through, but he rebuilt the wall immediately. "Your flight leaves tomorrow morning. Mr. Kim will take you to the airport." "You're not even going to—" Her voice broke. She tried again. "After everything, you won't even—" "No." Single word, final as a bullet. "It's cleaner this way." The door to their room opened, and grandmother appeared, leaning heavily on her cane. She looked smaller than Amaya remembered, as if the cancer was consuming her from within. "You cannot do this," grandmother said in Korean, her voice sharp despite her frailty. Tae-hyun responded in rapid Korean, but Amaya caught her own name, caught the desperate edge beneath his cold exterior. "She is not Minji." Grandmother switched to English, her eyes blazing. "She is not weak girl who needs hiding. She survived attack. She fought. She is strong. And she will stay strong in Atlanta," Tae-hyun said, standing. "This is for her survival, Halmoni. This is the only way." He walked out, leaving Amaya and grandmother in the wreckage of what might have been. "I'm sorry," Amaya whispered. "Don't apologize to me, child." Grandmother reached out, squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "Save that for yourself. You will need it in the empty days coming." The private terminal was exactly as Amaya remembered, sleek, impersonal, designed for people passing through rather than lingering. Mr. Kim carried her single suitcase, his shoulder still bandaged from the attack, his expression carefully neutral. She'd hoped, despite everything, that Tae-hyun would come, that he'd break his own rule one last time, that she'd see his face before stepping onto the plane that would carry her out of his life forever. But he didn't come. "Mr. Kim," Amaya said as they reached the gate, "will you give him something for me?" The older man nodded, and Amaya handed him a small envelope. Inside was the jade bracelet grandmother had given her that first day, the one that had never quite fit her wrist properly. She'd written a note on the back of her receipt, the only paper she could find. "This was always yours. I never fit it anyway. But thank you for letting me try." She didn't cry on the plane, didn't allow herself tears until she was alone in the Atlanta apartment Tae-hyun had arranged, paid for a full year, furnished with impersonal elegance, empty of everything that mattered. Only then did she collapse on the strange bed and sob for what she'd found and lost in the space of 4 weeks. Atlanta was beautiful in the early spring. Dogwoods blooming, the city alive with color and warmth and possibility. Amaya moved through it like a ghost. The call came 3 weeks after her return. Marcus was being released. The charges had been dropped due to newly discovered evidence and aggressive legal intervention. Her brother was free, would be home by the weekend, his life given back to him. Amaya should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt hollow. She'd taken a job at a contemporary art gallery in Virginia Highland, surrounded by beauty she couldn't quite feel anymore. The owner, a kind woman named Patricia, didn't ask too many questions about the resume gap or why someone with Amaya's credentials was willing to work for barely above minimum wage. She just handed her a key and told her the gallery was a good place to heal, whatever healing looked like. Every night, Amaya returned to her apartment and read the Langston Hughes book. I, too, sing America. I am the darker brother. The words that had once filled her with fire now just reminded her of hands that had held this book while choosing it, of a man who'd noticed what she loved and decided it mattered. Across the ocean, Tai-hyun was becoming something his family had always wanted, and he'd always resisted: truly cold, ruthless. The negotiations with rival factions carried a new edge, his decisions swift and merciless. People whispered that young Tai-hyun had finally become his father's son, had shed the last remnants of softness. Only Mr. Kim saw him late at night in the compound office, holding a hand-bound notebook, tracing watercolor patterns with careful fingers. Only grandmother knew he'd moved the jade bracelet from his desk drawer to his pocket, where he'd touch it like a talisman throughout the day. But grandmother wasn't speaking to him. When he came to visit, she'd turn her face away, refusing even to look at him. "You sent away your heart," she told the wall in Korean. "I don't recognize you. Don't visit me again until you find it." The cancer was winning. Everyone could see it. Grandmother had maybe weeks left, possibly days, and she was spending them refusing to see her grandson because he'd chosen fear over love. Tai-hyun lasted 3 weeks before he broke. He appeared at her door late one night, still in his business suit, and knelt beside her bed like he'd done as a child after his mother died. "Halmoni, please," he said in Korean. "I did what you taught me. I protected her. She's alive because I sent her away." "She's alive in Atlanta," grandmother replied, her voice weak but sharp. "The Huang faction is destroyed. Your enemies know you've annulled the marriage. She is no safer there than she would be here, and you are no safer without her. You've gained nothing but loneliness." "I can't," his voice cracked. "I can't watch another person I love die because of me." "So you choose to die inside instead? To become the monster your father wanted?" Grandmother turned finally, looked at him with eyes that saw everything. "You think your mother would want this? You think she died so you could spend your life afraid?" Tai-hyun said nothing, but his hands were shaking. "The notebook she made you," grandmother continued. "You keep it, the bracelet. You torture yourself with these things. Either throw them away or go get her. But stop this half-life. It dishonors her sacrifice, your mother's memory, and my last days on this earth." Grandmother collapsed 4 days later. The doctors gave her 72 hours, maybe less. The family gathered like vultures, already positioning for the power vacuum her death would create. Only Tai-hyun sat beside her bed, holding her papery hand, watching the monitors track her declining vitals. She woke in the early morning hours, her eyes finding him immediately. "Go get her," grandmother whispered in English, using her last strength for clarity. "Or die alone. Choose." "Halmoni, I can't." "You can. You're afraid." "I understand afraid." She squeezed his hand weakly. "But fear is not protection. Fear is just slow death. You watch your grandfather die slowly every day after I'm gone, or you choose to live." She reached up, touched his face with trembling fingers. "Go, before I die. Let me see you choose life." After she drifted back to sleep, Tai-hyun sat in the darkness of her room and pulled out the jade bracelet. Such a small thing. Delicate, valuable, meant for wrists more slender than Amaya's. She'd tried to wear it, had tried to fit into his world even when it didn't quite accommodate her. And he'd sent her away anyway. He thought about the months since she'd left. The compound felt wrong without her presence. His room felt cavernous. He'd become exactly what he'd always feared, his father. Cold, strategic, alone. And Amaya was alive in Atlanta, yes, but was she safe? Really? Or had he just traded one danger for another, for the danger of her being unprotected, out of his reach, vulnerable in ways he couldn't anticipate or prevent? The rule had been simple. Don't fall in love. Keep her safe through distance and detachment. But the rule had failed the moment he'd laughed at that market, brushed snow from her hair, held her after nightmares. The rule had failed because love didn't follow rules, and Amaya had never been someone who could be kept safe through absence. She'd fought attackers in his compound. She'd survived his family's cruelty. She'd loved him despite every reason not to. And he'd rewarded that strength by treating her like she was fragile, by making the same mistake he'd made with Minji, assuming that distance equaled protection. But Amaya wasn't Minji. Grandmother was right about that. Amaya was fire and steel wrapped in brown skin and determination. She didn't need to be hidden away. She needed to be beside him, where they could face threats together instead of apart. Tai-hyun looked at his grandmother, at this woman who'd been an outsider too, who'd survived decades in a world that had tried to break her, who'd outlived her husband and most of her enemies through sheer stubborn strength. Love in our world is curse and salvation, she'd told Amaya. You must be stronger than death. He'd been trying to be stronger than death by running from it. But maybe being stronger than death meant facing it together, meant choosing love despite the danger, not hiding from love because of it. Tai-hyun stood, kissed his grandmother's forehead, and made his choice. If death comes, he whispered in Korean, we face it together. He pulled out his phone, hands steady for the first time in a month, and dialed Mr. Kim. Prepare the jet, he said. We're going to Atlanta. Then he opened the notebook Amaya had made, studied the watercolors that merged his world with hers, and began to plan. Not for protection through distance, but for survival through unity. Not for safety through separation, but for strength in standing together. He'd sent away his heart once. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Grandmother died while he was en route to the airport, but her last words to the nurse were in English. Good boy. Finally, he chooses life. The jade bracelet stayed in Tai-hyun's pocket as he boarded the plane, a reminder of what didn't fit and what did, of rules that failed and love that endured. He was going to Atlanta. He was going to find Amaya. And this time, when death came, because it always came in his world, they would face it side by side, the way it should have been from the beginning. The spring storm came suddenly, the way they often did in Atlanta. One moment clear skies, the next a deluge that sent people scattering for cover. Amaya had stayed late at the gallery, cataloging new acquisitions, losing herself in work the way she'd learned to lose herself in everything that wasn't thinking about him. Patricia had left hours ago with a wave and a reminder to lock up. The gallery was quiet, just Amaya and the art and the sound of rain beginning to hammer against the windows. She gathered her things slowly, reluctant to return to the empty apartment, to another night of Langston Hughes and memories that wouldn't fade. The rain was torrential when she stepped outside, her umbrella nearly useless against the wind. The street was empty, everyone sensible already inside, and she was debating whether to wait it out or make a run for her car when she saw him. Across the street, standing in the rain, no umbrella, no coat, just Tai-hyun in jeans and a soaked t-shirt, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, watching her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Amaya's umbrella slipped from nerveless fingers. It couldn't be him. She was hallucinating, conjuring him from loneliness and longing, because young Tai-hyun didn't fly to Atlanta. He didn't stand in the rain like some romantic movie cliché. He didn't leave his empire and his obligations and his carefully controlled world for anyone. But he was moving now, stepping off the curb, and she could see the reality of him, the way his chest rose and fell with breath, the tension in his shoulders, the expression on his face that was equal parts terror and determination. He was real. He was here. Traffic was minimal but steady, and Tai-hyun walked through it like it didn't exist, his eyes never leaving hers. A car honked, another swerved. He didn't stop, didn't even acknowledge them, just crossed the street toward her with the single-minded focus she remembered from that first dinner when he'd defended her against his family's cruelty. Amaya stood frozen on the sidewalk, rain soaking through her clothes, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "You're here," she said when he reached her, the words barely audible over the storm. "How are you here?" "I flew commercial," he said, and there was something almost sheepish in his tone. "Middle seat, terrible food. No guards, no Mr. Kim, just me in a carry-on bag." "Your grandmother." "She died." Pain flickered across his face. "2 days ago. Her last words were about me being a good boy for finally choosing life." He laughed, but it was broken. "She died while I was on my way to the airport, because I waited too long. I'm always waiting too long." The rain was cold, but Taehyun was warm when he took her hands. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, that same gesture from their first dinner together, the silent alliance that had begun everything. "I was a coward," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I hid behind rules because I'm terrified of losing you. I've lost everyone I've ever loved, my mother, Minji, now Halmoni. I thought if I could keep you at a distance, if I could convince myself it was just business, I could protect you from the danger of being close to me." "Taehyun, let me finish, please." He took a shaking breath. "But living without you is already death. This past month has been worse than anything the Huang faction could have done to me. I became the man my father always wanted, cold, strategic, alone, and I hated him for it. I hated myself. Then he did something Amaya had never seen him do, something that in his world was surrender and sacrifice, and the ultimate declaration. Jung Tae-hyun, heir to a crime family, a man raised to never show weakness, dropped to his knees in the rain on an Atlanta sidewalk. "In my culture, elders don't kneel," he said, looking up at her through the rain. "Bosses don't kneel. Men in my position, we stand above, always. But I'm kneeling for you, Amaya, because you're worth more than any pride, any rule, any protection I thought distance could provide." He reached into his pocket with shaking hands and pulled out the jade bracelet. The delicate thing caught what light remained despite the storm, beautiful and fragile, and somehow still whole despite everything that had tried to break it. "You left this behind. You said you never fit it." He held it up to her. "But you were wrong. You fit it perfectly. You fit my world, my life, my heart, all the parts I thought were too damaged or too dangerous for anyone to navigate. I was too blind to see it, too afraid to believe it." Amaya was crying now, tears mixing with rain, her whole body trembling. "Marry me," Taehyun said, "really this time. Not for show, not for family approval or business arrangements or to satisfy grandmother's tests. Marry me for us. Because I love you. Because I can't breathe properly without you. Because you make me want to be the man I was before the world taught me to be cold." He slid the bracelet onto her wrist, and this time it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along for her to be ready to claim it. "Marry me, Amaya. Be my wife, my partner, my reason for choosing life over fear. Help me be brave enough to deserve you." For a moment, Amaya just looked at him, this powerful man on his knees in the rain, offering her everything he was and everything he had, asking her to take the risk with him. Then she reached down and pulled him up with both hands, refusing to let him stay in that position of surrender. "You knelt," she said, her voice fierce. "A young never kneels. Your family would be horrified. I don't care about my family's horror." He stood but didn't step back, their bodies close despite the rain and cold. "I care about your answer." "You flew commercial," Amaya continued, a smile breaking through her tears. "Middle seat, terrible food." "The worst food," he agreed, "and a crying baby 2 rows back." "You came alone, no security, no Mr. Kim to protect you." "I came for you. That's all the protection I need." Amaya touched his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw, the curve of his lips, memorizing the reality of him after a month of memories. "You said you're not Young Tae-hyun, the boss." "I'm not. Not here. Not with you." His hands came up to cover hers. "I'm just Tae-hyun, the man who loves you, the man who wants to spend the rest of his life proving he can be brave enough for the both of us when fear comes calling." "Then hear me. Just Tae-hyun." She leaned in close, her lips almost brushing his. Yes, to all of it. Yes to marriage, yes to partnership, yes to facing death together instead of running from it separately. Yes to you, exactly as you are. Broken pieces, terrible fears, beautiful heart, and all. She kissed him then, fierce and claiming and forgiving, pouring a month of loneliness and longing into the connection. He kissed her back with equal intensity, his arms wrapping around her like he'd never let go again, like he was memorizing the shape of her in his embrace. The rain continued to fall around them, soaking them both, washing away the last remnants of rules and distance and fear. Cars passed, people hurried by under umbrellas, and young Tai-hyun held Amaya Washington on a sidewalk in Atlanta, choosing love over safety, partnership over protection, life over the slow death of isolation. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Amaya looked at the jade bracelet on her wrist, perfect fit, perfect symbol of how wrong they'd both been about what could and couldn't work. "Take me home," she said. "Whichever home we're choosing. I don't care anymore, as long as we're choosing it together." Taehyun smiled, really smiled, the expression transforming his face into that boy from the photograph, the one who'd known joy before tragedy taught him fear. "Together," he agreed. "Always together. That's the only rule that matters now."